Let me talk about Lee Marvin, the tough guy in Hollywood who left behind more than just movies that people will never forget. He left behind a lot of money, $16 million. Even his family was shocked by that amount when he died in 1987. His huge wealth wasn't the only thing that made news years after he died, it was also the complicated web of relationships and feelings that went along with it. Most of Marvin's money went to his third wife after he died, Pamela, through a trust, giving her most of the estate's rights. But this was just the start of a fight that would last for decades. Wendy, Marvin's daughter, had lived in a house owned by his trust for 25 years and thought it was a gift from her father. Without anything written down, she thought her father had made his wants clear before he died, but those wishes were open to question. As the guardian, Pamela said otherwise. She said that Marvin had never made any official promises about the house. Since the house was part of the trust, she was legally allowed to decide what to do with it. Things got even messier when Wendy's husband's legal problems. He pleaded guilty to a child abuse charge made Pamela dislike him even more. Wendy thought that her mother's choice to kick her out was based on personal grudges, but Pamela insisted that she was just doing what she was allowed to do. When the courts got involved, the case turned into a real-life family story. Wendy said that Pamela wasn't doing what the law says she should do as manager, which is to be fair to the trust's beneficiaries. Wendy 19% and Pamela 81% of the business were the ones who really benefited in this case. Pamela did have the benefit of the law on her side, though, because gifts given orally rarely hold up in court, especially when it comes to something as important as real estate. There were heated arguments during the trial about what Marvin really wanted and whether Pamela's choices were good. It wasn't just the house that was making them angry, it was a lifetime of troubled relationships. A family fight broke out over Marvin's wealth, which he had built up over many years of hard work. In the end, the court agreed with Pamela, but the scene will be remembered for a long time. How did Marvin do that? How did a man who used to make only $7 a week as an actor get to this $16 million wealth that caused so much trouble? How did he go from barely getting by to leaving behind a mess that caused so much trouble in his family? That's where the story really starts. To understand the wealth, you have to go back to the beginning, to his early years as a young man trying to figure out where he fit in the world. There was no poverty in Marvin's life. Indeed, he was born in New York City to a good family. His father was an advertising executive and his mother was a writer. They gave him a stable and wealthy childhood. Lee Marvin, on the other hand, wasn't the type to follow the rules. He was kicked out of many prep schools for causing trouble. As a child, he was clearly rebellious because he threw his peers out of windows, snuck off to smoke, and generally made a mess everywhere he went. This kid didn't follow the rules. He would never change the way he thought about things. Marvin made a choice that would change him forever when World War II broke out. Before he was sent to the Pacific as a scout sniper in the Marine Corps, he was in a lot of dangerous action. He risked his life many times during the 21 attacks on Japanese-held islands. He didn't have long in the service because he was shot during the Battle of Saipan, known for. He liked to say, "Kick me in the behind." Marvin didn't really know what he wanted to do with his life after the war. It only paid a few bucks a week for him to work as a helper to a plumber in upstate New York. But one day, fate stepped in. When an actress at a nearby theater got sick, Marvin was asked to fill in. At that time, something clicked for him. He loved acting so much that, with the help of the GI Bill, he chose to make it his career. He went to school in New York, at the American Theater Wing. Barely making ends meet with small theater jobs and the odd TV appearance. Marvin was making very little money at this point, sometimes only $7 a week. He didn't care, though. He was hooked. In 1951, Marvin got his first movie part as a signalman in the Navy movie You're in the Navy Now. Even though it wasn't a big part, it got him to California, so he stayed there to try his luck in the movie business. The first few years were hard. Marvin was often cast in small parts as soldiers, cowboys, or thugs because he was known as a tough guy. But he stood out even then. He was good with a gun, could move like a soldier, and had real grit that most artists could only fake. Not long after, Marvin started getting bigger parts. In the 1953 movie The Big Heat, he played a cruel killer who reportedly threw hot coffee in the face of a woman. A shocking event that people still talk about now. In the same year, he was in The Wild One with Marlon Brando, which made him even more famous as one of Hollywood's favorite tough guys. Marvin was still not rich, even though his paychecks were getting bigger. He wasn't quite ready for the big games yet. These things changed in the 1960s. Marvin had made a good name for himself as a character player. But it was his part in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance that made people really pay attention. Marvin stole the show from John Wayne and James Stewart when he played the crazy killer Liberty Valance. It was clear that he was no longer just a supporting performer. He had the makings of a main man, Hollywood agreed, and Marvin soon started getting paid more. Marvin was at the top of his game with Cat Ballou in 1965, a funny western in which he had two parts. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor because the movie was such a big hit. Even better, his pay went through the roof. Marvin was making $1 million a movie by the late 1960s, which was a huge amount of money at the time. Even big stars like Paul Newman were only making a little more than that. His wealth started to grow, and it wasn't just from acting. He also made smart career decisions. Many times he did parts in movies that paid well, even if critics didn't like them. He only cared about the money, and who could blame him? By that time, he had to keep up a lifestyle that included expensive tastes and a lot of hard work. Marvin wasn't just making money from movies, though. He also made smart investments, but not much is known about them. It's clear that Marvin was good with money enough to build a big fortune, even though he was known for drinking a lot and loving the high life. He had more than one source of income, so even if his acting job ended, his wealth would still be there. Marvin's work had changed by the 1970s. Those tough guys and bad guys that made him famous were no longer the only roles he played. Instead, he was taking on a wider range of jobs, and each one was adding to his already impressive income. In 1970, Marvin was in the western Monty Walsh with Jack Palance and Jean Moreau. Even though the movie wasn't a huge hit at the box office, Marvin's pay showed how famous he was becoming. At this point, he was getting paid up to $100,000 per movie, which was a lot of money for the time. After this, Marvin played with Gene Hackman in Prime Cut, a violent and stylish movie that came out in 1972. I can't think of anyone else who could have played a hitman with such cold accuracy, and Marvin got paid well for giving the part its own unique edge. During the same year, he worked with Paul Newman on Stuart Rosenberg's movie Pocket Money. The movie didn't get great reviews, but Marvin's fee added a nice amount to his wealth. At that point in his career, his name was enough to sell a movie on its own, and studios were ready to pay for that. Emperor of the North, which came out in 1973, was one of Marvin's best roles of the decade. Marvin played a no-one, a hobo fighting a cruel train driver during the Great Depression. He starred opposite Ernest Borgnine. The part was tough and unflinching, and Marvin was great for it. A lot of people don't say how much Marvin made, but it's safe to say that each movie he worked on now made him at least $500,000. This man had gone from making $7 a week doing theater work to making enough to buy whole towns if he wanted to. Marvin also played the lead role in The Iceman Cometh, a big movie based on Eugene O'Neill's play that came out the same year. Even though Frederick March and Robert Ryan were in the group, Marvin held his own and gave a well-rounded performance that got good reviews. You could say that Marvin was a name by this point. Studios knew it would cost them to hire him, but they were willing to pay it. He was in the news even when Marvin said no. He was asked to play Quint in Steven Spielberg's Jaws in 1975. Think about what that could have done for his job and his bank account. But Marvin, in his usual blunt way, said no, memorably saying, "No matter how much money was on the table, Marvin wasn't the type to take roles he didn't believe in. This choice could have cost him millions in residuals and future chances. Marvin wasn't really short on cash." He co-starred with Roger Moore in the 1976 action movie Shout at the Devil, which was set in World War I. People liked the movie, and Marvin's performance as an oddball ivory poacher showed how versatile he is. This was Marvin's big paycheck because he was now one of the highest-paid stars in Hollywood. He was also in The Great Scout and Cat House Thursday, a funny Western with Oliver Reed, the same year. Even though critics didn't like the movie, Marvin made a lot of money from it. By the late 1970s, Marvin's work and personal life were linked in ways that made news. People all over the world knew about his public court case with his ex-girlfriend Michelle Triola Marvin. 6 years of living together led to the end of their relationship in 1970. Michelle then filed a groundbreaking case to get money and a share of Marvin's earnings. She said Marvin had told her he would take care of her for life if she quit music to be with him. The case made headlines all over the world, with a lot of fans and press at the courthouse. Michelle asked for $1 million, which was a huge amount of money at the time. She said she deserved half of the $3.6 million Marvin had made while they were together. Marvin, who was always direct and unwilling to say sorry, denied making such a promise. He said there wasn't a contract, even though he admitted to giving her money for an abortion and letting her handle some of his accounts. Whether he has talked or not about sharing his wealth. The trial went on for weeks, and both sides won some key points. In the end, the judge decided that Michelle did not deserve half of Marvin's income. Instead, she gave her $104,000 to help her get better. This wasn't the million-dollar payday she had hoped for. It was just meant to help her get back into the job market. Marvin thought the decision was a win. Telling the press, even though it cost Marvin a lot of money, the case didn't really hurt his wealth. The attention only made him more mysterious and interesting, if that's possible. In 1979, Marvin and Robert Shaw worked together in the Cold War movie Avalanche Express. Both Shaw and director Mark Robson died before the movie came out, which was a problem during production. Even with these problems, Marvin gave a good performance, and his pay for the movie was another sign of how popular he still is. By the end of the decade, Marvin was still one of Hollywood's highest-paid actors, and his ability to get paid a lot of money meant that his wealth kept growing. Lee Marvin was still showing that he was the best in Hollywood well into the 1980s. His first big project of the decade was for his war movie, The Big Red One. Samuel Fuller was in charge. He played a sergeant who had been in a lot of fights and knew how to kill. Marvin played the part with a sense of seriousness that came naturally to him because he had been through war himself. Critics took note. People said it was one of his best roles, not because of any exciting action, but because of how calm and collected he was as the character. Not long after that, he worked with Charles Bronson in the 1981 action movie Death Hunt, where they fought in the cold wilderness. Marvin could have played that part in his sleep, but he didn't. He did what he said he would do, and the movie made $5 million at the box office. A lot of people loved seeing it.